In December 2019, I was standing early in the morning at the Amsterdam harbor watching how thousands of Tesla Model 3s rolled off the ship. That year, this model was the most popular car in the Netherlands. And that was all due to the low additional tax liability for business drivers at the time. Because in period of December alone, almost 11,000 units went to those business drivers. They benefited from a 4% additional tax liability. But now in 2024, 2025, almost 5 years later, all those cars are coming back on the market as used models. And that's quite interesting because the prices are surprisingly low. At the moment, they are already for sale for about 15,000 to 17,000 euros. And for that money, you could also buy a Volkswagen Polo or a Kia Picanto, for example. But what would be a smart move? Is it interesting to buy a second-hand Model 3? What should you pay attention to? What are the advantages, the disadvantages, the points of attention? We're going to tell you all about that in this video today. And afterwards, you'll know if it's a smart move to get a Model 3 for a bargain. At autorij.nl, we generally know quite well what we're talking about when it comes to cars. But when it comes to second-hand models, there are people who have even more knowledge. And that's why today we're joining forces with Simon. Because Simon, you work, among other things, for Viabovag, and you are a choice coach. Tell us, what do you do in your daily life?
I actually help people, both by phone and email, with the choices they need to make.
Especially in the field of second-hand cars.
Second-hand cars, new cars, leasing. In fact, everything is discussed. But used is, of course, the main focus.
Yes. And how much knowledge do you have about the Tesla Model 3?
I'm starting to learn a lot about it.
Okay. Because they are now appearing in droves on viaboven.nl. There are already hundreds available for purchase. And probably many more in the coming months.
Yes.
And the prices, can you say something sensible about that? Because they have dropped quite significantly.
Yes. Yes, you really do see that cars with a lot of miles are now coming onto the market. And then indeed, the rear-wheel drive. Rear-wheel drive with the shorter and smaller battery. And they are indeed entering the market well now.
Yes, and then we're talking about prices at the time of recording. Between 15, 17, let's say, thousand euros.
It assumes that those are indeed the prices at a decent garage. Good dealing companies.
And then, of course, many more will come onto the market. Can you give any kind of forecast on whether those prices will drop further, do you think?
That's a good point. That's quite unclear. On one hand, there's a lot of publicity around it, so everyone thinks, hey, Tesla, maybe I should focus on that. And if more people focus on that, it might be good for EV sales. On the other hand, you also have export, so that can also have an effect. What does the export do? Does it yield more than in the market? But I certainly think in the short term that it can still be a very interesting story. And then after that,
yes, because on paper, this really seems like the deal of the century. A car that originally cost, let's say, 50, 60, 70,000 euros 5 years ago, now for less than 20. Then you already have a very decent one. But today we're going to figure out what you need to pay attention to. And a brief history of the Model 3 might also be interesting. Developed by Tesla, of course, in America. We saw the first signs of this car around 2016. Right. This came onto the market in 2019 and it immediately became extremely popular that year. Yes, extremely. It was available in 3 variants back then. You had the standard range, the long-range rear-wheel drive, and the performance, with insane acceleration times and massive power. What is your first general impression of a Model 3?
I think it's quite an improved product where X and the Model X and Model S had. I also think it's more accessible and functional in terms of use, in terms of the car. A car of 470 meters that is still functional. So overall, very good. Big enough for your family too. Yes, only. I would be cautious at IKEA though, because if you take that cabinet, you might need to take it in 2 parts instead of 1. So there will still be some functionality, but in general, for electric driving, it's certainly a very fun car.
The first important point of attention with the Model 3 is the finish and build quality. Simon, what should we pay attention to with the Model 3?
I would definitely look at any moisture. That seems to be a big problem. You can also see that when you look at the trunk and open it, Then it turns out that some water can get in. This one is electric, but you will see that it causes a problem. It causes multiple problems. Think about the camera, wiring.
That mainly has to do with the rubbers in the earlier models not being thick enough, allowing moisture to get in. This one is fully equipped with all sorts of mats and things, right?
Yes, this looks nice, but indeed moisture at the bottom is not unimportant.
And dry?
Dry?
Good. But we also talk, for example, about the way the different body panels fit together. I can still remember standing at the port with the model that was just newly delivered there. This one was, for example, a bit twisted and the plastic was over the paint. So pay close attention when you're looking at cars to see if all those panels are fitting nicely.
Yes, indeed. I think that's a good point. How are the panels aligned? How are the seams? Can you also see if one is a bit wider? So yes, those are things you need to look at. One, what is the build quality? But two, also, is there perhaps some damage?
Yes. But well, it's of course also a bit typically Tesla. Or do you say it's a reason to panic?
No, not at all. I would want to take a look first, but it's really not that bad.
Okay, so yes, it's not German build quality at all. The later models of Tesla do have that. The earlier ones were a point of attention. Yes, another point. Simon, the paint on a Model 3. It's also not known for its top quality.
No, I think that black color, which was quite popular, was sensitive to scratches. So yes, you might be shocked. On the other hand, we might have a secret weapon for that. That's a paint thickness meter.
The paint thickness meter, of course.
You measure with that and then you know if it's correct or not.
Yes, but now I know quite a few. Few people who have a paint thickness meter in their home tool arsenal. So if you don't have one, what should I look out for?
Well, at least check for any color variations. And sometimes the bumper will have that anyway. And if there are seams in the paint, for example.
Yes. What is also a good tip, by the way, is that there are Model 3s equipped with paint protection film PPF. When you see that, it's a layer of plastic over the paint. Then the previous owner has taken better than average care of their car. So if you find one that has it, it might be a good plus point. Isn't that right? Have we forgotten anything?
No, I think that's a good point, that plastic foil.
Those sills, we were still being talked about them, especially models from the American factories in the beginning. They had paint on the door sills that would peel off. Well, if you overlook that during your test drive, then you really haven't used your eyes. So be alert.
Yes, although it might be less noticeable on a white one. So keep that in mind. But indeed, that clear coat peels off. So you can run your nail along it, and if you see it coming off.
Simon, you are a man of details. And details are also important with the Tesla Model 3, especially if it has been used. The trim pieces that run from the A-pillar to the mirror, they tend to come loose sometimes. And indeed, with you too.
Neat. Yes.
Yes, these are all those loose parts that over time tend to come loose. So that's something to keep an eye on. Also not a point to panic about excessively.
They are small details, but still it's a reference for what I should pay attention to.
Yes, and while we're at it, about those small things, are there any other issues we should watch out for?
I think, also look at the sills among other things. If you look there, you will see that the strip sometimes tends to come loose, the Tesla Model 3. And that's something I think you should pay attention to. Yes, we were just talking about the trunk lid and possible moisture. Well, yes, unfortunately, you don't only have moisture in the trunk lid. It can also be with the taillight units.
But these are perfectly dry. What do you pay attention to?
Especially moisture traces on the inside. And that does indicate, hey, is there a leak?
Yes, and that leak can lead to
the headlights not working properly anymore, or even possibly failing an inspection.
Another point of attention, by the way, regarding the lighting of the Model 3, especially the headlights, which are sometimes set too high after a software update. You can adjust that manually via the screen in the car, but that's also something to keep an eye on. They are not always perfectly in place.
That's right, and the computer allows you to adjust that. So it's not unimportant to possibly pay attention to that.
And then, Simon, we have a point of attention regarding the wheels, especially concerning the ceiling caps on them. What can you tell us about that?
Well, they tend to be removed sometimes, mostly for luxury, but the aerodynamics are, of course, quite useful. Shall I show you how it looks without them?
Yes, please. It still needs to be sold. You know, just kidding, of course. Most people, at least. There are buyers of the Model 3 who remove them because they think it looks bulkier. See? But this is somewhat less aerodynamic, so the car would theoretically consume a bit more. A good tip is to make sure that the original aero wheel covers are included, so you can put them back on if you want to.
Original Yaoer parts should, in principle, always be included with the car.
Do you know anything about tire wear and so on? Does the Model 3 stand out in that regard?
It's not too bad. The idea is often that tires wear out faster on electric cars, of course, due to the torque and the weight. But in practice, it turns out to be not that bad. Obviously, you just got a Porsche 911, so if you handle it differently, it might wear out faster.
You mean in terms of performance?
Well, but also in terms of traction. So that means if I drive faster, have more slip, then also faster. Tires wear out.
Yes, it's an obvious point, but check. The tires and the wheels, such as the rims and other components. Simon?
Yes?
The roof also requires some extra attention on the Model 3, right? What should you watch out for?
Certainly. I think you should definitely be careful when mounting the roof rack. It can be a problem if you tighten it too much. And then it might cause a crack in the roof. On the other hand, you might just have stone chips. Keep in mind that this can just happen.
Or a severe collision.
And that's something you really need to pay attention to. So while driving, check if it makes any noise. But it's definitely a sensitive point with this car.
Yes, also in another area. Because in many used Model 3s, the rear defroster no longer works. The wiring just breaks. So definitely check that while driving. If there's some condensation, or you can create some yourself by blowing on it. And drawing a heart, as you mentioned. But anyway, you can check it properly that way. It would be annoying to own the car and find out it doesn't work. This is an important one, and we find it here. Simone.
Rear view camera.
Tell me.
Well, moisture again. That can cause a problem, and then you have no image.
Yes, because the cable runs, let's say, through the tailgate to the back. It can then become corroded or damaged by a...
Yes, the connection at least. The cable can come into contact with moisture. Then you have a problem.
Yes, and then it's not just a matter of replacing the cable and the camera, or?
No, it could also be the wiring harness, of course. So it depends on what needs to be replaced. A wise tip, just check it. Shall we check it?
Yes. Well, your foot on the pedal, Simon.
And it works. Yes, the next point could be the loading flap. Why? Well, you know that during the first encounters, it could still be misaligned. And besides, there's also the chance that the cable might be too short, and that can cause scratches.
Yes, for clarity. This is mainly about the cables of Tesla's superchargers. They have those stations along highways and such. There you have a fixed station with a fairly short cable. So you sometimes have to adjust it a bit to fit it into the charging port. This can result in damage from the cable or the plug hitting the paint, for example. Or a flap that goes wrong, or people driving into the charging station. And then the interior. Because Simon, we've just established on the outside that finish and material quality is an issue with the Model 3, and that applies here as well. What should we pay attention to?
Think about what piano lacquer is. It can cause scratches, but also just damage. That looks a bit less attractive when you've been using such a car for years. So that could be a point of concern. Here, however, they have improved that.
For clarity, that black piano lacquer, that light scratching. Plastic, you could call it, was mainly in the early Model 3s. This is already a model from 2021, so it already has a nicer center console with a lid on it and no piano lacquer, but a kind of synthetic leather. Looks just a bit better. So especially with those early models, keep in mind whether you can live with it, that the car looks a bit less nice in terms of quality impression and scratches, or if you want to go for a somewhat newer model. Yes, correct. Furthermore, there is of course also an important point in this car, and that is the large central touchscreen. Also, be careful with that.
Certainly think of, among other things, pixels. Pixels burned out. Think of LCD displays, like your own iPhone. If there's damage on it, you might be able to operate it less. And if you can operate it less, that can be a problem.
Yes, you might say, well, it's just a screen in a car, but in the Model 3, it's quite a significant part of the car because you actually control everything in that car. At least this generation still has the gear stock and the turn signals and so on, but even the adjustability of the steering wheel and mirrors is done via the central screen. So you just need that thing and you want to ensure it works. Absolutely. Beautiful, right? Those frameless windows. But there is indeed a downside to them. Like what, Simon?
Yes, the windows can start to rattle over time. Think about how they move back and forth. So that causes some wear. So especially testing the windows is very important with the earlier Model 3s.
But how do you test the windows? By moving them up and down frequently? Or do you have other tips?
Well, but it could also be that if you grab it and see if it moves too much. That could be an issue.
Yes, because it's of course nice that there is no frame around those windows. But in practice, Model 3 owners grab the windows, here to open and close their doors. And that can cause instability in the motors that operate the windows. So check that during the test drive. And then you're good. And by the way, this one has double glazing, Simon.
Yes, at the end of 2020, they improved that for both sound, insulation, but also think about stability. So perhaps that will really make a difference now, but time will tell.
Exactly. New models are also here. Maybe a bit better, but keep an eye on it. And then there is, especially with the early Model 3s, a trend that Tesla capitalized on. Those are the white interiors. It's synthetic upholstery anyway, faux leather, indeed vegan leather. What should we watch out for?
Well, keep in mind that with your nice jeans getting in and out, you might eventually get stains. And then the question is, will they come out? So that could be quite annoying if you're going to drive it for 5 years.
Then you don't have a white interior, but a sort of light blue interior. So that's a point to consider. Wear and tear. That's generally quite manageable. The seats are quite sturdy. They are also quite comfortable. Yes, they are well adjustable. Well, so that's not really a point of concern. But do pay attention to that synthetic feel. And then those assistance systems. The cars are, of course, full of them. Tesla called it full self-driving at that time. The point is, make sure that in whichever ad you click on, the car is actually equipped with the systems the ad promises. And how do you do that?
You look, among other things, at safety.
Yes.
And then it's important that in the menu structure, you see everything that is also indicated in the ad, like pilot assist, but also your cameras and other things.
And the autopilot section, of course. This one has auto steer, and then you have full self-driving. Over the years, they've attached all sorts of terms to it. That wasn't all standard. So just check if the systems that are on it or that you want are also on it. And definitely check if they work well. That's also not unimportant. And we have a trick from behind the scenes. You can also put the car in service mode. You know how that goes? And then you can also see the service history of the car, what updates it has received, and whether it is up to date. Then you press here. Hold Model 3 for a long time under the software menu, and then you select service. Few people know this, but this is let's take a look. Yes, enter. What do you get to see then?
With a car, you get a computer system, and it's called an onboard diagnostic system too. And with that, I can see if there are any errors in the car. Are there things I need to know? And the nice thing is that I, as the owner of such a car, can find that here. Are there certain problems where no warning light has come on?
Yes. So normally, you would do that with an OBD plug laser, but this can all be done in the car itself. Here you can see the service history. You can also see if there are any alerts, for example. And here you can immediately see which autopilot hardware is installed. This one has full self-driving with computer number 3. So in that way, dive into the system, I would say, and check if everything is correct and if the car is up to date.
Certainly. I think that's important.
And here you can also check if the previous owners have been completely removed. Because, of course, you don't want the previous Model 3 owner to know where you are. And perhaps still be able to open the car with another key. And you certainly don't want that. It is and remains a digital device. Yes, Simon, it's not for nothing that it has become a very popular car. Aside from the low tax benefits, that is. It's also quite technologically advanced. Much further in terms of technology than most competitors, especially in 2019. But in terms of driving, are there points you should pay attention to, also in terms of wear and tear, for example?
Wear and tear, think of things like brakes. Brakes can be quite an issue. The funny thing is, with a hybrid electric car, you hardly use them. So the funny thing is you get reverse wear, then they start to form corrosion at some point.
Just rusting then.
Yes. A good tip is to do an emergency stop once a month. Another point can of course be, and Teslas are known for this, the control arms Keep that in mind. The upper control arms, maybe the lower ones too. Dirt, moisture, salt can get in there. That can lead to rattling noises, and that can happen with cars with less than 60,000 kilometers. So make sure that it causes those strange noises, and always include that in the purchase contract, especially if you have doubts. So those kinds of things, so that it falls under warranty. Stukelum still seem to make some noises, so that could also be something to watch out for.
Yes, and also. This applies especially to the early cars. They are. Over time, Tesla has technically improved these cars further and further. And especially those early models, they are actually, while they were already flying, they built the airplane? Absolutely. That's one way to put it, right? Absolutely. A quick note about the brakes. This car, of course, brakes mostly using its electric motor. You can also set regenerative braking via the menu. So, in practice, you don't use the Mar disc brakes that much. That has advantages, low replacement costs and such. But also things, they don't wear out, but they do deteriorate.
You get exactly the opposite of what you would normally expect with your brakes.
Especially those first models of the Model 3, when you talk about the chassis, they are relatively stiffly sprung. So, don't be alarmed by that while driving. That's just part of the car. But as you clearly point out, stiff is one thing, noisy is another.
Yes, definitely. In general, electric is quiet and comfortable. So there might be a few more points to consider while driving, but yes, it's quite manageable. But it is indeed stiff, of course. Keep that in mind for yourself. What is definitely nice, I think, are the safety systems you have on board. And that's typically Tesla. Think of your autopilot, but also the dynamics around it. You have one screen, but it is very clear and straightforward, interactive. So that's nice. And you have other features like wireless charging, and you have the beautiful panoramic roof when it's intact. So yes, in that regard, it's quite nice.
What also stands out to me, I haven't driven the Model 3 for a while. Now we're driving a model that's a few years old. It drives so incredibly well. It's sharp, it's really a bit of a sporty sedan. So I immediately see that as a clear advantage. But do pay attention to the creaking of the suspension. Absolutely. And another good point about a Tesla, Simon, I always find, the fact that they were one of the first manufacturers with over-the-air updates. Yes, what is it in your opinion, the advantage of that?
Well, I think it saves so many visits to the dealer because the software has a problem somewhere. Or isn't it strange that when the hardware works, the software often, just like your iPhone, it's a matter of, we've updated it, I have 18.1. No, 18.2 is better. Again, well, there it comes, and that gives you an advantage. Just make sure you don't do it on the highway, because it can sometimes take a long time.
Yes. By the way, it's also interesting that you can check the state of the technology in the car itself. The moment you put it into service mode via the system, you can conjure up all sorts of details, also from the car's history. And in that area, the telematics. Tesla is already much further ahead than the competition.
Certainly. I think that the Wi-Fi is one patience, but also that you create a kind of transparency for your driver, the owner of that car. What is the state of health? What is the battery status? What are other things, and what can I use? So, in that regard, they are also quite ahead in their software.
But what would, if we're talking about that battery, normally be? Your advice to potential buyers of a second-hand electric car? What advice do you give regarding that battery?
The battery is the heart of that electric car. So if you know that the battery is good, then you will enjoy such a car for a long time. So, testing that battery statically, but also perhaps with another system where you have more certainty, is important.
But, well, you're using a bit of jargon now. We are theoretically well-versed in this matter. But are you talking about a static battery test or a dynamic battery test?
Yes, you have to imagine that you can do a battery test just purely on the spot, and then an OBD or a computer indicates, hey, if that's possible. Not all cars can do that. What is the state of the battery?
That beast gets the cells through.
Those cells, and are they good in terms of voltage, temperature? But you can also have it dynamically. With others, you sometimes see it presented on TV. And a piece is driven from fully charged to empty. That can sometimes take quite a while. That's the only thing. But with that, you can then see, hey, what is the range? And is it accurate? And is there no discrepancy in the cells, for example?
So your advice would be?
I would definitely do a test.
Okay. So the car already indicates, in principle, through the system, what the state of health of the battery pack is. It measures that itself. You do need to let it sit for at least 90 minutes or even 50 hours. So that's something to keep an eye on. But you say, anyway, Tesla batteries have a good track record in terms of wear and battery degradation. But you would still say, as a precaution, always have it checked. Always. Clear. And what about the warranty Model 3?
Model 3 has 160,000 kilometers on the standard range, 8 years. And that is quite comparable to many other manufacturers. The long range even goes up to 198 for the performance. Yes. And the nice thing is that even maintenance is not very crucial there. So that's quite bizarre. Does Tesla itself think so? Tesla itself thinks so, I understand. So that's quite unique. So yes, that does provide some assurance. Of course, the car must be free of damages and all sorts of other things. Otherwise, you won't have that warranty.
Clear. But Tesla doesn't necessarily say you must adhere to a very strict maintenance schedule. Otherwise, your warranty no longer applies.
Regarding the battery, at least that is separate from it.
Neat. Another plus point I always find, a Tesla is the fact that you can use the supercharger network, an underestimated element of driving a Tesla. Of course, that you can also go there with other brands nowadays. But with a Tesla, you really do benefit from the necessary advantages. So, I suggest we let it roll. Simon. That supercharger network, Simon, is absolutely a USP of driving a Tesla. Other brands don't have that, and there are more elements that other brands don't have.
That's right. I only think of the app. I can open and close it remotely. Of course, the product itself. What do you buy for $15,000?
For that, you can buy, among other things, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, a Volkswagen Polo or a Kia Picanto. But then you miss out on many elements of such a Model 3. So if you're talking about value for money, it's an almost unbeatable combination at the moment. Especially when you take our list, Simon's tips, and our advice into consideration in your decision. Do some research. Make sure you thoroughly understand the history of the specific Model 3. Then we can conclude, is a Model 3 a steal for $15 million?
Yes, I would do it. If everything checks out, the battery, the dealer, the feeling, and it makes you happy, then it's not a bad choice.
Very nice. Thank you again for watching this video on autoride.nl in collaboration with VR Bovag and with our choice coach. Thank you, Simon. Are you going back? Haha.